Right, we've got a Frontier block here, and this is going to be showing you how to replace a front pole where the ball joint's popped out. All Frontiers share exactly the same centre boss. Different tube lengths are used depending on the sizes, but that's irrelevant to this. To strip this down, you need two different Allen key sizes, a 3mm and a 4mm, and they're to go through and undo all of the silver nuts and bolts on both sides here, which I'm about to show you how to do now. Those are the 4 bolts on the main boss with the 3mm Allen key. The other 3mm are the 6 bolts that hold the front brace on. 2 on the underside and 4 on the front. Make sure you put all your screws in a safe place so you don't lose them. I'm going to leave one of these in for now, because if this front brace comes off too early, then the whole assembly can fall to pieces and just cause you more problems. So I'm going to switch to the 4mm Allen key now to do the bigger bolts, which are all of the tube pivots and the 4 main ones holding the boss together. These can be a little stiff because the pivot bosses apply some pressure on them, so they may need a little wiggle. They're all held up by captive nuts, but these can fall out, so watch for them falling onto the floor once you've loosened all these off. One I've missed there. Okay, once they're all out, you'll find that some of the nuts will start to fall away. Just make sure you keep them in a safe place. These parts should all slide out and move away. I'll undo the toggle here so we can move the fabric back. Sorry, did you see that? Yeah. So the toggle should be there just to hold the centre of the material up close to the boss. Just pop that off, and you can slide the sleeves back to show more of the boss. There. A little wiggle, and we're getting these nuts falling out. Just make sure you know where they've gone. Right, with the 2 screws there, the centre rear leg will just slide out now. So now you're left with a boss. Get rid of all of the screws. So we're now left with our boss with just, I'm still losing nuts, 1 3mm Allen key bolt holding the front brace on. So we take that off, and if you can, what we've got here is a little plastic cover, making sure the pivot for the front release is held in place. If you can keep this in position, it saves you a lot of aggro. But what I will do now is pull it off so you can see what happens if this accidentally falls off, or if you need to change any components within this area. This actually just clips off, and the complexity is just making sure you've preloaded these springs when you reassemble, which I'll go through later. So there's nothing holding this boss together now, so it will start to split, and you can pull it apart like that. For the sake of replacing this ball joint, I'll simply locate that back in now, and with a little wiggle, he says, things should align back up, and you can just push the whole thing together. I'll go through in a second just how to reassemble the rest of that. If you need to replace this front pole here, then once you've got the block disassembled to this level, you'll need to knock out the center pin here, which the whole front pole pivots on. To do so, elevate it up so that you're not resting on anything directly apart from this boss. Make sure that there's room for the axle to come out this way, and then I'm going to use an Allen key and a hammer. Just place it on there and give it a tap. You can see that the pivot's starting to push through now. From then on, it just pops right out, and you can pull the front pole off the top part of the block. At which point, just reverse the procedure to put either a new pole in or a new axle, depending on which parts you're replacing. In which case, you'd be lining them up. Get your pivot in place, gently tap it through. And then just make sure it's flush on that side and and again flush on this side. So you might just need to give it a little tap back, at which point you've got your new front pole set up all in place. And we'll go through how to reattach everything back up and reassemble the block from here. So now we're going to reassemble a Frontier block. We've got the bottom half here, the top half here. We've got all the screws and nuts laid out around here. The front catch release, the front brace bar, and the front locating part for the catch release. We've left all of the legs in the bivvy, as well as the front poles. The center front pole is already pre-assembled on the top block. So now we just need to locate the ball joints here and here. Make sure you've got them on the right side, not the wrong side. So just a quick check that everything's lining up and you've got them in the right orientation. Set them in place there. Then the easiest way to do this is actually to have this at 90 degrees to those, for the way that the bottom part slides in and snaps up. And now you've got both ball joints fully secured in their correct positions. So to move forward, we'll start to put some of the screws back in to prevent anything falling out. For the larger screws that take the 4mm Allen key, you've got 4 longer bolts which go in the outer pieces, which are actually the pivot bolts for the rear legs, and 4 shorter ones which are simply closure bolts for the 2 parts of the block. So we'll start with one of those. I'm going to take it, push it through. I'm going to take one of the nuts for this size screw, pop it in. It'd be handy if I got the right Allen key in place. Put my thumb over that just to stop it coming out. The plastic moulding holds it in place so it's not going to spin. I'm not going to do it up too tightly. There we go. That's now secured the whole block together. I'll just slowly and methodically go through each one of these now, placing them in, pushing the nut down, and nipping them up. I'll go through them all afterwards and tighten them correctly. If the nut's not pushing far enough through, I'll sometimes use another screw just to help it get in place so that they start to locate with each other. Right, I've got my 4 major ones there. There's 2 smaller cap head style ones which work here and here. Now the nuts for these very rarely come out, but if they have, they're small and they sit underneath the catch release mechanism here. Right, now they're all in place, I will start to locate this up to the rest of the rear legs. The best one to start with is the rear center one because it's fixed. That simply slides into place there. You've then got your 2 countersunk bolts and your smaller nuts. I'll put the 2 nuts in place underneath the block. And then push these through. And nip them up. Again, just holding them in place with my thumb on the back so they don't pop out when I'm doing this. Right, they're in place in the rear legs, exactly where you want it. That also helps you work out exactly which one of the pivoting legs you want where. And now it's a case of just wiggling them into place using the longer, larger bolts. If there's too much tension, they might not want to push through, so you may need to bend it back up. But that, as you heard and can see, slid into place. Again, just checking to make sure you've got the right leg in the right position before you do it all up. Right, now you've got all of your major bolts in place. I'll just go around and make sure they're torqued up to the right value. Fairly tight, you don't need to tighten them. All of these nuts are nylock nuts, so they're not going to fall off. Obviously you don't want them totally loose, but you don't over tightening them is simply going to damage things further. Okay, so you've got your main block back in place now. The last part is to put your brace back on and relocate your front pole catch. And it's really the front pole catch that's the tricky bit. Okay, the hardest part of replacing this is making sure these 2 springs are located properly on this face up here. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to do it in one go smoothly for you now, but I'll try. The best way to do it is to put one side of the pivot in first, and with something like a flathead screwdriver, lift the first spring up whilst pushing the whole block part in. A bit of patience is always needed. You will get there. Right, that part's now in. We've got to locate the second spring without this first one popping out. So I'm going to get hold of it like that. And as you can see, that one's popped back out now. But there you go. That's both of them in. And you can see here that neither spring is now dangling lower down. If you've got one of them dangling lower down, it's not in the right place, and therefore you won't have your proper spring tension of the lever. Before that accidentally pops out, I'd get the plastic retaining piece and place that there. You know you've got it the right way around because the two cutout pieces face down. And then before anything else goes wrong, pop your plate on the front and put one of the smaller screws in place. Do it up. And now you know it's not going to pop off. And to replace the rest of the screws on the brace, and you'll be finished assembling the block. So there's 4 of the smaller screws, one's already in place. And then finally, the 2 longer ones come in from underneath. And there you have it, a fully reassembled block with whatever repair or replacement you needed to put in. If you need to remove to either replace or reassemble the front poles, you'll need to remove these front plastic caps. Now I'm going to use a screwdriver, which I put a bit of masking tape around to help prevent damage to the other components around it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to locate it by one of the snaps and then just slowly twist off until the plastic part wants to nip off like that. Now I've actually damaged the snap slightly doing that, so it would probably be better to have done it further over here, but that won't be detrimental in the long run. For these parts, they're keyed, so that's going to need to twist all the way around before you can slide it off, like that. And it's really important to make sure there's no tension on this plastic holder for the eyelet. These are held in by 2 pips here and here, and if there's too much, these start to pull out, and they'll also cause you problems trying to relocate that. And if they're damaged too much, then the whole assembly will need to be replaced. But if you're replacing the fabric or a pole, the eyelet will just pull off then. If you're replacing the front pole or reattaching one of these front caps, I'll show you how to do that in a second. But to remove the cap in the first place, again, I've used a screwdriver with a little bit of masking tape around to prevent damage to the eyelet. I'm just going to tease it in near to the snap and just twist it off, give it a little wiggle until it snaps off. That's now come off. With the centre pole actually has this aluminium insert inside it, which is really important. This is part that interacts with the spigots on the vapor peak. And if you lose this or reassemble it without this, your vapor peak won't interact with the pole properly and it won't sit at the angle it's supposed to. So when we get around to reassembling, or if one of these has unfortunately come loose in your bag or you've ground it on the ground, make sure when you get a new one, you've either got that part or you get a replacement part to put in when you put it back together. But now that's off, that will simply lift off. And again, you've got to make sure there's no stress on the 2 pivot pins that pip in and hold this hollow plastic sheath in place. If you're replacing the pole, just remember that it does go through the sleeve on the front of the fabric. If you're replacing the fabric or you're reassembling the front pole, just make sure you've got it lined up correctly. And you can slide it through the sleeve. You probably need to give yourself a little bit more slack here by sliding those back. Make sure you've worked out which one's going where. So you've got that one on that side, the front pole there, and the eyelet for the other front arm there. I'm going to assemble the front pole first. So making sure that there's no stress on this sheath here, I'm simply placing the eyelet over. If there's tension and it's pulling this back, it can stop you from putting the front cap on properly because it expands the 2 locating pips either side. Okay, making sure your sheath for the vapor peak is in place inside the tube. There's no stress on the plastic part there. Line the front cap up with the 2 indents you see on the inside there to the T section snap piece here, which will look something like that. Push it on one side and then it should just push on over and locate. If it hasn't fully, just give it a little tap with a hammer, nothing serious, and now it's in place and the eyelet can freely rotate, but yet everything is held in place securely. To put one of the front side arms back in place, you take it, make sure that there's no stress. This is properly located and the pins holding this relative to the pole are in the right place. Place the eyelet over it. Then take your storm pole boss. You can see that there's a profile on that. You make sure that the two recesses go over the snap like that, and then twist it. It actually can't come off now. And you're looking to pop the cap back in place. So again, there's a recess on each side, locating to a T-bar section snap here. That'll line up, pop on one side, and then just pivot over with your hands. If it's having a little bit of trouble, gentle tap with a hammer. It should be securely in place. All through that, you mustn't be putting any serious stress on the plastic piece underneath through the eyelet, because that can stop this from going on properly. If you need to replace one of the main legs, or you're removing the fabric for whatever reason to replace it, you'll need to access the way that the fabric and the legs interact, which is a screw that's on the underside. Now on a used bivvy, this will actually be plugged with loads of mud. This one's particularly dried. My technique is you use something like a small Allen key and basically just give it a rotate in there, a little blow, and you've cleared all of the muck out, so you can get the 4mm Allen key in place and you can take the screw out quite easily. That releases that, which means if you've undone the leg at the top end of the boss, that will now slide completely out of the fabric. Or if you're looking to replace the entire fabric sleeve, do that on all 5 back legs, along with removing the clips from the front poles, and the entire fabric will just slide off from the sleeves.